Hi, Armin. So glad to be here with you.
Hi, Tim. Pleasure.
Today, we are speaking to the incredible Armin Shimerman. He's played so many iconic roles. Some of those include Principal Snyder in Buffy, Quark in Deep Space Nine, and Andrew Ryan in BioShock. Today, we will be talking about the play he has just directed at the Antaeus Theatre in Glendale, running from February the 9th to March the 17th. The ticket link is below. Juliet and I saw Armin's version of The Crucible, which he directed for Antaeus. It was mind-blowing and visionary. Armin is not only a brilliant actor, he's a brilliant director, and the actors at Antaeus are quite extraordinary.
Thank you, Deb. And if I may correct you on one little tiny thing, we're Antaeus, not Antaeus. Antaeus, come see us, as opposed to Antaeus, you have to pay us.
Antaeus. There you go. Well, you said it better than I could say it.
Yes, Antaeus, come see us.
What is Snyder?
Snyder is actually the name of one of the producers on the Buffy producing team, and my character is named after one of the producers. In fact, the caricature that crawls across the end credits goes, that's Snyder. That's the producer, Snyder.
Before we begin, where did this love of Shakespeare come from?
Oh my God, way back when. I think it started in high school when I didn't think I was going to be an actor, but I did a production of Hamlet in high school and rather fell in love with the language there. And then I went to UCLA where I was an English major, and I had a phenomenal Shakespeare teacher named David Rhodes. And David instilled in me a great, great, great love for the language and for the plays. And eventually, I graduated as an English major from UCLA and was enormously lucky. Even in my last weeks of a senior at UCLA, I auditioned for the incredible Old Globe Theatre in San Diego, which is a Shakespeare festival that's been around for a very, very long time. And 800 people auditioned for the roles I was looking for. 8 of us got chosen. I was one of the 8. And so that cemented my love for Shakespeare. And then I went on to have 2 or 3 other incredible Shakespearean teachers. In the meantime, I have not only studied Shakespeare, I have delved into the Elizabethan era. So I know a great deal about the period and about the people that inhabited that period. Every day, I study something about either the period or about the place.
How much direction have you done, Armin?
How much direction? I have directed 6 plays, most of them Shakespearean plays. I always think that I'm not really fit for directing because I haven't done that much. But as you said about The Crucible, most of my productions have been incredibly acclaimed and well-respected. Thank you, Dev.
Why did you want to do this play in particular?
I didn't. I wanted to do Richard II, but the theater wanted to do Twelfth Night. I have directed Twelfth Night before, and as you know, Dev, I've written 3 novels about Twelfth Night. So I wanted to do something else, but our artistic director said, no, we want you to direct Twelfth Night. And I said, well, I'm really familiar with that play. Yes, I can do that play. And I looked into it and did a lot of studying of the play and of the productions that had been done over the course of 400 years and began to fall in love with it all over again. It's a terrific play. Most productions of Twelfth Night are done as out-and-out comedies. My production isn't. My production is more of a nostalgic, a melancholic. It's a comedy, definitely, but there's a lot of melancholy in it, and I believe that's already in the play. And there's a great deal of music. A lot of times the music in the play is left out. There are lyrics in the play. Every edition of this play that you'll ever read, you'll see the lyrics, and usually people skip over the lyrics. But I wanted to include the music. After all, one of the most famous speeches from the play is, if music be the food of love, play on. So I wanted us to play on with music. And one of the great things about my production, if I may say so, is the extraordinary compositions that John Lee composed for the production. He also plays Vesti. He not only has composed the music, he plays the music in the production, and he sings the music in the production. And he has a glorious voice. He's a very talented man.
Can you give me a brief synopsis of the story?
Let me tell you what the brief theme is. It's about disguise. So we have a lady named Viola who is shipwrecked on an island. She has come from a boat that's split in half, and she lost her twin brother in the accident. She's mourning the loss of her brother, but she's shipwrecked on this island, and in our production, she's shipwrecked in the Manhattan Harbor. And she's heard of a man named Orsino, so she decides to work for him. But in order to survive in this society, as it was true for centuries, you couldn't survive as a woman. As a woman by yourself without a male support, you were in great danger, physically and mentally. So she decides to dress up as a boy. so that she can make her way through this country, which is called Illyria. And she falls in love with the man that she's working for, a man named Orsino. He, in turn, has fallen in love with another lady on the island. Her name is Olivia. And he's gobsmacked over Olivia. He's rhapsodic about his love for her. And he hires this boy, who's now called Sebastian. Viola is now just is called Sebastian. And hires the boy to woo for him this lady, Olivia. Unfortunately for Orsino and Viola, Olivia falls in love with Cesario, who is really a woman, who's really Viola. And the comedy ensues in the mistaken identities. And again, it's about disguise. And in our production, everybody is somewhat in disguise, whether it's disguising themselves from other people or whether I have one actor playing two roles. For instance, my wife, Kitty, plays both a man and a woman in this production. Disguise is often mentioned in the script, and I wanted to take advantage of that. So we could go a lot further with the plot, but that is basically the plot.
I would come and see it from that.
Oh, you're too kind, Dev. You're too kind.
You talked about how you wanted this production to be accessible. How do you think you've achieved that?
Yeah. One of the things I've done for decades now is teach Shakespeare to actors in Los Angeles and in other cities as well, Minneapolis, really around the country. I have taught Shakespeare to actors. And what I teach them is a study called rhetoric. Now, rhetoric is a way of putting forth an argument in a memorable and meaningful way. It was studied by the Greeks. They gave it to the Romans. The Romans passed it on to Europe. And people studied rhetoric up until the beginning of the 20th century. It was essential for anyone who went to school prior to the 20th century to study rhetoric. And it's a way of putting language together and, as I said, making arguments. That study waned at the beginning of the 20th century, and we may get it in college if you're lucky, but most of the time we don't get it. Now, if you study rhetoric, Shakespeare, which is often thought difficult, becomes much, much clearer because Shakespeare isn't so much the words have changed. And yes, some words have changed, but rather it's the way Shakespeare puts words together. That's why people don't understand it, because they don't recognize the connection between the words. I'll be happy to give you some examples about how this works. So what I do is introduce actors into the study of rhetoric and point out something that are called figures, how to put words together to make them memorable. And once the actors have learnt some of the rudimentary ideas about rhetoric, it's amazing how much clearer the speaking of Shakespeare becomes, and exponentially clearer for an audience to understand what's being said. The problem is most actors don't know how to do that, and that's why when you go to a Shakespearean play, a lot of it just goes over your head, and you think to yourself, I must be stupid because I can't understand what they're saying. Yes, sometimes it's the enunciation, but most of the time it's because the actors don't know either the words, the meaning of the words, or they don't know how to put the words together in a rhetorical fashion. Okay, now you're going to ask me to give you some ideas about rhetoric.
But what?
Okay, in the study of rhetoric, there are approximately 250 different ways to put words together. And each of those ways are called figures. The expression figures of speech comes from the rhetorical figures. So there are basically, in my opinion, for the actor, 6 rudimentary things that you have to know about rhetoric in order to make it clearer. The first one, the one figure that Shakespeare was in love with, it's all over his plays. It's everywhere, all the time. But if you don't recognize it, you stumble over it. And that figure is called antithesis. It's 2 things that are opposite put together in the same idea. For instance, the most famous antithesis in Shakespeare, obviously, is to be or not to be. That's an opposite. You either are or you aren't. It's one or the other, and they're opposites. Now, if you're a Hamlet that wants to live, then the to be part of the equation is the more important one. And so you say to be, and then you denigrate the second part, which is the opposite. To be or not to be, that is the question. And that gives the idea, the emphasis, the focus that you want to live. To be or not to be, that is the question. If it's the other way around, if it's a suicidal Hamlet, then the not to be is more important. And so you say to be or not to be. That is the question. Now, that's an easy one. And then, of course, if you say to be or not to be, that is the question. You can see you've avoided the antithesis altogether. And although the line is understandable because it's so famous, you haven't gotten across what Shakespeare wanted you to hear, which is the antithesis, the opposites. Now, that's an easy one because it's so famous. But if you look at the thousands of other antitheses in Shakespeare, if you stress the more positive, and by positive, I mean the right thing for your way of thinking. For instance, honor and dishonor. For Hamlet, and for most noble characters in Shakespeare, honor would be the more preferable side of the antithesis than the dishonor. But if you're Richard III or Iago, then the dishonor would be what you would stress. And you have to teach this to actors to look at the argument, and that's what rhetoric is about. It's about arguments. Most of Shakespeare is arguments, making a point about something. If you show the actor these are arguments, and you need to make the audience clear that you're trying to come to some conclusion or to substantiate a conclusion, then the language becomes exponentially clearer. It's miraculous. It's a little like when I was a young man, I took French, and I've forgotten most of it. So when I approach French, I sort of know some of the words, but I don't know all of them, and therefore it's really difficult to read. But someone who speaks French really well goes, yes, I understand all of that. So if you understand rhetoric, the understanding of Shakespeare becomes that much clearer. Now, one other one, it's not just antithesis. You've asked me now, you've opened up a can of worms. There's also something called repetition. Repetition is a figure. If a word is repeated in close proximity, it's a stage direction from Shakespeare or any other classical writer. It doesn't have to be just Shakespeare. This was taught up until the beginning of the 20th century. Everybody wrote like this. If a word is repeated, then it's a stage direction to say, stress the word. For instance, I will give you a speech from Richard II. Would God that any in this noble company were enough noble to be upright judge of noble Richard, then would true noblesse teach him forbearance. Now, I haven't stressed the noble here, so it's gobbledygook. It's just words. But if you play the game so the audience gets the game, it becomes clearer. So, would God that any in this noble company were enough noble to be upright judge of noble Richard, then would true noblesse teach him forbearance. You see, there's the argument. And it's clear, and you get the game that Shakespeare is playing. And then there are 6 others, which I won't go into, but those 2 are usually the first ones I teach people when I'm teaching class. So you ask, go back to your original question. How have I succeeded? I've succeeded by making my actors, for the most part, follow these rules. And because they're doing that, this is a very, very, very accessible production. When you come to this play, I hope when you leave, people say to themselves, God, I didn't realize I could understand Shakespeare that way. And it's because the actors have done the work for you, as they should always do.
You talked about dual roles. Why did you choose to do dual roles?
We have 10 actors in the company. I believe 7 of the actors have dual roles. One reason, financial. My theater couldn't afford 17 actors. So we had to make it down to 10. But more importantly, and more thematically, and more historically, this is the way the original company did it. The original company didn't have really 17 to 30 actors. It had probably about 15. And those 15 would change over the course of time. But oftentimes, an actor would play 2 parts. If you were the lead actor, if you were Burbage, for instance, who was the lead actor in Shakespeare's company, you'd play 1 part. You'd play Hamlet, and that would be it. Shakespeare is attributed to have played the kings in Shakespeare's company, so he probably played Claudius. So he would play probably only 1, maybe 2. But everybody else would double. And if you begin to look at the plays with a critical point of view, you begin to see the little Easter eggs that Shakespeare has written into the plays to have a joke about the fact that the actors are doubling roles. In our production, for instance, I have the man playing Orsino, who is the lover, also play a cop later on in the play. And the cop only has really 1 line. His line is, I arrest you in the name of Count Orsino. Well, he is Count Orsino. That's the Easter egg that's there. There are lots of little Easter eggs here and there that if you're attuned to them, you can find them. Like Easter eggs, they're hard to find on a treasure hunt, but you have to hunt for them. Will the audience get it? Sometimes they do. Most of the time they don't, but they're still there. It's one of the reasons I decided to double cast, was to see if anyone would pick up on these Easter eggs.
Love that. Your amazing wife, Kitty, is in the production. Which 2 characters did she play, and how is it to direct her?
Kitty plays both Mariah and Fabian. Fabian is usually a male. Sometimes it's Fabia, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted her to play a male because in Shakespeare's time, as we know, men played women. So why not in the 21st century have a woman play a man? Why not? And Kitty does a great job with both roles. She's very funny in both roles. Mariah is often played as a wench, as a serving woman. And the truth of the matter is, if you really look at the play and see what Mariah does and see what her access is to Olivia and the others, she's not a maid. She's sort of like a traveling companion to Olivia. She's not equal to Olivia in status, but she's just short of that. And she lives with Olivia to keep her company, like a traveling companion would travel with someone when they go abroad. That's how I see Mariah, and that's how Kitty plays it. In this play, it's always a surprise at the end that Mariah has married Sir Toby. Sir Toby is Olivia's cousin, who is the chief character in the play. He has more lines than anybody else in the play. But I didn't want to make that a surprise. I wanted to show the growing relationship between Mariah and Sir Toby, and we have that all through the play. And so it's no surprise at the end when, of all people, and again, this is an Easter egg, when Fabian, played by Kitty, who played Mariah, says, oh, Mariah and Toby have gotten married. There's an Easter egg. And hopefully people get that one. That's pretty obvious. So I wanted to double it sort of the way Shakespeare originally did, because I think there's some fun in that. And Kitty does an excellent job, as do all of them. My cast is superb. They tend to be older as well. It's a little bit older than normally cast. Why did I do that? Because usually it's a play about young people falling in love, and there's comedy in that, of course. But I think there's also comedy in older people who are falling in love for the last time. This is their last chance. And that's the melancholy that I mentioned before. And I wanted people who had a couple of years on them.
Brilliant. Is it fun for you guys to work together? You guys work together a lot.
It causes friction. And before we started rehearsals, there was quite a bit of friction. Kitty was very sure that she was too old for these parts and it would never work. And because she had me 24/7 in the house, as we went over the lines, I would suggest to her ideas. And I'm sure she got a little fed up with me feeding her ideas 24/7. But she admits to me over and over again that once we entered rehearsals, she has done a lot of plays, and she said this is one of the favorite rehearsal processes she's ever had.
What's the experience of this production been for you?
My approach to a lot of these characters is very different than most productions, in the sense that I had done so much homework on the play that I looked at it with a fresh eye. I wanted to see what was in the text that perhaps other productions had overlooked. One of my favorite things was to discover that Sir Toby, played by Rob Nagel, is a drunk, and not a pleasant drunk. Now, he's a comic character, and he's a comic character in our play as well. But the comedy comes from him manipulating other people. He's sort of ugly in his drunkenness. He covers it up with charm. But I also wanted him to have the ugliness of being a falling down drunk. I wanted ugliness as well as beauty and lightness and that sort of thing. I wanted to mix the two together. As I said, it's a melancholic production. I had to convince some of the other actors, too, of the slightly different way to approach these characters than they've seen it. I mean, all of my actors have seen this play probably more than once. And so they have memories of how it was played, or they've seen famous English productions and remember how that was played, or they've read Judy Dench's book and how she played it. So they have all that to come from. And that's all good. That's all terrific. But those were productions done in a different time. And every play, when you remount a classical play, if you just do it the way everyone's always done it, then in my mind, it becomes a museum piece. It becomes a little bit stale. We're just replicating something that other people have done before. So I'm looking to understand how this play, written over 400 years ago, applies to our 21st century experience. The drunkenness is something I talked about. This is an ailment that many people have today, and the people around them suffer from it. So I wanted to deal with that. I wanted to deal with the fact that Olivia is in mourning for her brother and her father, as Viola is for her brother, who she thinks is dead, who really isn't dead, but who she thinks is dead. And Sebastian, her supposedly dead brother, how he's in mourning for what he supposedly thinks his sister's dead. I wanted to look at the deeper, darker, uglier aspects of the play and the characters and still mind the comedy that's there. I didn't want it to be froth. I wanted there to be great substance below the froth or in amidst the froth. And I think my actors and I have done that with our production.
I'm so excited. What have you learned doing the play? What shocked you that you discovered?
The epiphanies that you get in rehearsal. I had no idea how much epiphany I would have as a director. That watching the actors do something, oh, that's terrific. Let's go further with that. Let's take that idea that you just gave me and go a little bit further with that and push it in this direction or push it in that direction. Or where do you want to push it? But let's go further with this. It's the epiphanies that have surprised me over and over again. And although I'm really familiar with this play, what the actors taught me about the play, what hearing the lines umpteen times informs me about the language, that's startling that I didn't know this before.
Can I ask you, because you've written so much about this play, was it hard for you to turn off your writer head and all the previous productions you've seen? How do you get to a place where you're like, I'm making this mine?
Right. That's an excellent question. I've had the good fortune on occasion to repeat roles in Shakespeare that I've played before. And it's always my thrust to never play it the same way, to play it radically different than I've done it before. So there wasn't that much of a difference between me saying, okay, I've directed this before and I've written books about it. Let's look at it with a fresh eye. Let's see what I missed before and let's try to forget everything that I know about this play and start on page one from square one and approach it that way and be open to what the actors and the designers were offering me in way of ideas, because it's a collaborative process. The director starts out knowing more about the play than everybody else. But about week 2 or week 3, and we rehearse for about 4.5 weeks, the actors know more about their characters than the director does. And I was open to saying, okay, what are you going to teach me about these characters that I didn't know? And as I told you before, they taught me a lot. And it's fascinating to see them grow in the roles. So whatever I learned before, that's lovely. I want to remember all that stuff, certainly, but I also want to discover new stuff.
That's fantastic. Are you going to a lot of the performances? If so, if people come by, will you likely be there?
I most likely will be there, although as the director, one says, okay, now my children, you're on your own. You have to take care of yourself. I will go to, I would say, a third more of the performances.
Again, the play is running till March the 17th. Thank you so much, Armin. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Deb.